It's a very special day here at Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark.
Well, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark opened on Broadway this week.
I've never read quite so horrific reviews.
Was plagued with problems. Performers were seriously injured. Reviews were dreadful.
They have to sell out for 3 years to break even.
Julie Taymor, who's directed this, Adam Pascali, the Broadway actor, says, she should be, charged.
Now, the most expensive show in Broadway history at $74 million has been revamped.
$75 million down the drain. That is unheard of for a Broadway musical, and this debuted in previews in 2010, nearly 15 years ago. It didn't even come close to recouping its investment. What happened? This, by all means, it should have been a big success. By all means, maybe if you had Spider-Man, a musical on Broadway today, it would be a success. It doesn't make any sense. Broadway is currently feeding off of large intellectual properties, shows that are based off of movies, shows that are based off of TV shows, shows that are based off of classic stories. So what happened with Spider-Man? Hey there, I'm Jared Goldsmith. Welcome back to Curtain Calls. Today, we're going to be talking about how one of the biggest intellectual properties called Spider-Man became one of Broadway's biggest flops in history. Now, when I say Broadway flop, I'm not talking about it closed in one night. Spider-Man didn't close in one night. It actually ran a couple years, but it couldn't even come close to recouping its $75 million capital. So for starters, we're going to talk about the literal physical theater where Spider-Man Turned Off the Dark opened. They really want Spider-Man out there, but I'm on my YouTube grind, so Spider-Man doesn't get paid for saving the world. Why does he do that? Peter Parker is an idiot. He's a kid. He's just a kid. He's a stupid kid. Peter Parker's just a kid. He's a little stupid. He don't get paid for saving the world. He don't get paid for saving the world. First, I want to talk about why the theater itself that Spider-Man opened at was a disaster, right? This theater, obviously it's very old, but it actually used to be two theaters. It was the Apollo Theater and the Lyric Theater. The Apollo Theater was built in 1920, and the Lyric Theater was built in 1903. These are both on 42nd Street. In the 90s, there was a big move to clean up 42nd Street. We can do a whole separate video on this. Times Square got cleaned up, and the theater district got revived, and Disney entered Broadway. Drop a comment if you want to see that. But basically, this theater was two theaters combined into one, right? So they made one supersized theater at about 1,800 seats. 1,800 seats makes it the second largest Broadway theater in history, only behind the Gershwin Theater, where Wicked currently has been for the last 25 years. Roughly. Over 20. Something like that. Math. Garth Drabinsky, a Canadian producer of a company called Livent, wanted to take this theater to the next level. In about January 1994, he toured it. There are other videos about Garth Drabinsky. I think he's in prison now. I think he didn't pay his actors for Paradise Square, the musical, and maybe a couple others. Beyond the point. While the combined theater was proposed to be a restoration of the two historic theaters, the two historic theaters were basically completely demolished. By December 1996, pretty much the only thing left of this theater was the front facade of about 4 stories, and then Ford Motor Company decided it was going to help sponsor the theater. So the theater actually reopens as the Ford Center for the Performing Arts. In 1998, Ragtime plays at the Ford Center for the Performing Arts, then followed by a revival of Jesus Christ Superstar, neither of which run for too long. Then the musical 42nd Street was revived at the Ford Center for the Performing Arts in May 2001. This show was actually profitable during its run, but it closes in 2004 after about 1,500 performances. This show closed due to a lack of money. In November 2004, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang opens at the same theater that's now called the Hilton Theater. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang only lasts for about 285 performances. Up next, the musical Hot Feet flops at the Hilton Theater. It closes in about 3 months. Followed by The Pirate Queen. Pirate Queen opens in 2007 and also is quite a flop, doesn't make any of its money back. Finally, Young Frankenstein, Mel Brooks' new musical, opens in 2007. This is November 2007. This was actually one of the few shows to continue operating during the 2007 Broadway stagehand strike, and that strike literally occurred right after Young Frankenstein opened. Young Frankenstein runs for about 485 performances through January 2009, and Young Frankenstein shutters amid the 2007-2008 financial crisis. Whoop. Finally, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark is booked for 2 years later. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark. You gotta go wherever spiders can go. Spider-Man, Spider-Man, a musical on Broadway. But in August 2009, Spider-Man's running into a lot of issues. They're running out of money, and the show is delayed again. The Hilton Theater remains dark for about 2 years, from January 2009 until the end of 2010, waiting for Spider-Man to take its newly renamed title of the Foxwoods Theater. So this theater is literally cursed. It's cursed right up until Spider-Man enters on swinging webs. Oh boy. And then the show begins. Previews begin for Spider-Man in December 2010 and last for nearly 7 months. So just to zoom out for a second, Broadway musicals go into previews for about 1 month, maybe 6 weeks. So producers, writers, actors can sort of fix a few things, get the show to what's called frozen. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark had a whopping 182 previews, which is literally unheard of. Some Broadway shows don't even run 182 performances. I mean, 8 shows a week at 4 weeks a month, that's like 64 shows. I mean, 7 months of previews. Some shows don't run for 7 months. This is unheard of. In 2010, 2011, when Spider-Man's in its first year, 7-month preview trial period, 2011 is, I think 2012 is the first year that the Andrew Garfield Spider-Man movies come out. So at this point, we're post Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, we're post the Sam Raimi version, and I don't know that Marvel's as big as it is today. The cinematic universe is existing. Iron Man 3 comes out in 2013, I believe, which is around the time Spider-Man is still playing and running. So big cast, big spectacle. It can be tough if you don't have the right team behind it. But let's talk about the team for a second. So the director of this show, at least to start, was Julie Taymor before she ended up leaving. Julie Taymor directed the most successful Broadway musical of all time called The Lion King. It looked as though this was perfect. They had Julie Taymor on board. She had done The Lion King. It was an IP before it was a Broadway show. Why couldn't she convert Spider-Man, a popular IP, into a popular show? Well, it's not always that easy. Making a musical make sense is tough. The Lion King has a very clear musical storytelling, even in that original movie, and it's based on Hamlet, which is a play. Spider-Man, you have these comic books that work, but how can we translate it on stage? It might be a little cheesy if you use puppets, the way you did for Lion King. You can get a bunch of Green Goblin-looking things, but is it really gonna work? Also, if we have multiple villains, how are we gonna know who to follow? The Sandman? The Green Goblin? On top of Julie Taymor directing, we have U2 and Bono composing the score. And U2 and Bono don't really have any experience with musical storytelling. They have a lot of music experience, a lot of rock, pop, world tour music experience. They're world-renowned artists, but can they write a musical? Just because you have that power doesn't mean you can always come on in and write a good musical. You know, sometimes it happens. You know, you see a Sarah Bareilles, it translates to a popular musical like Waitress, but it doesn't always mean that because you know music, you know musical storytelling, right? On top of that, to write the book, we didn't have anyone popular who had written the book for a musical before. They ended up getting show doctor, creative consultant, Roberto Aguirre Sacasa. I hope I'm saying that right. Roberto had written an updated book for It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, which was kind of the only other superhero musical we had in Broadway history. This came out in the 60s. At that time, in the 60s, I believe it was 1966, that was the most expensive musical ever made. Critics actually liked It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman, but a lot of audiences didn't want to go because I don't think they believed that was appropriate for a musical. I don't know if that's really the case, but that's just my hunch. I wasn't alive in the 60s, though I am kind of an old man myself. But it should be noted that the writers of It's a Bird, It's a Plane, It's Superman wrote other popular musicals like Bye Bye Birdie, Annie, and Applause. So they had a little more business writing a musical. Honestly, they probably should have just hired someone like Stephen Sondheim. I don't know that Stephen Sondheim would have been too interested in writing Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark, but what would Stephen Sondheim's Spider-Man sound like? I can only imagine. Gotta shoot, gotta swing, gotta spin that web, gotta shoot, gotta swing, gotta spin that web, spin Spider-Man, fly through the traffic flow, now my web's topped off, gotta go, web, go! Doc's gonna block me from MJ, my spidey senses all play defense, but evil is tense and so immense, I gotta swing in and save the day. Gotta shoot, gotta swing, my senses ring, I have a hunch that Dr. Rock is gonna be on the clock and wants me squashed by lunch. Uncle Ben way back when said with responsibility comes great power, and even in my darkest hour, wait, gotta swing, my senses tingling. That would have been so interesting. It probably never would have happened, but at least we got a taste of what it could have looked like. I don't know what it would have sounded like if a different pop artist with a different sense of musical storytelling had written the score. Maybe like Billy Joel. Billy Joel had written songs for Oliver and Company, which was a popular Disney movie. What would Billy Joel's Spider-Man Broadway score have sounded like? I'm Spider-Man, I'm Spider-Man, I do whatever a spider can. I swing a web all through town, I'm gonna turn that goblin upside down. And when he pushes my love, Mary Jane, through the sky, I'll make New York crime free, 'cause it's on me to fly. It's my hour, I won't cower, I keep order and civility. I'll devour, but with great power comes great responsibility. 'Cause I'm Spider-Man, I'm Spider-Man, I do whatever's my Spidey plan. You don't know me, and I miss Uncle Ben. I gotta save the day and my Aunt May. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man. Oh, oh, oh. On top of Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark having confusing previews and confusing delays with opening, there were a lot of injuries that happened to the cast, which is never a good thing. Up until this point, I feel like the only major injuries you heard about on Broadway were Idina Menzel going down the trap door and breaking her ribs in one of her final performances of Wicked. But here, we have a literal laundry list of injuries that happened with this show. Christopher Tierney, a stunt performer, literally falls 20 feet into the orchestra pit during a performance, fracturing his skull, breaking his shoulder, injuring his ribs. It took him months to recover. Natalie Mendoza suffered a concussion from the first preview performance in November 2010. The first preview performance! Couldn't even get one show in! She was struck in the head with a rope holding stage equipment. She eventually left the production over concerns of her safety. Kevin Aubin, a stunt performer, broke his wrist during a rehearsal. Daniel Curry was seriously injured in 2013 after the show's already been running for like a couple months, over a year, when his leg got caught in a trap door. He had to be hospitalized. Jennifer Damiano reportedly suffered a lot of cuts and bruises during her performances as well. She was the original Mary Jane. She also was the original Natalie in Next to Normal. TV Carpio was also injured during the production and left in March of 2011 during a battle scene. And this was the same track that replaced Mendoza. I think it's important to note here that most of these actors were just regular old Broadway actors like me or you. They didn't expect this to be dangerous. They expected it to be work. The original Peter Parker was Reeve Carney. Reeve Carney was the original Orpheus in Hadestown. The original Green Goblin and Norman Osborn was Patrick Page, who was also in Hadestown as the low singer who was like, "Hey, little songbird, I sing like a baritone, I sing like this." The original alternate for Peter Parker, yes, there was an alternate, just like there was in Dear Evan Hansen and in 13 and in a bunch of shows nowadays. The original alternate was Matthew James Thomas, who left Spider-Man to go do Pippin. I think it's actually worth noting, too, that Pippin utilized great Cirque du Soleil effects, which Julie Taymor probably could have used for Spider-Man, but they didn't. Instead, it was a lot of aerial stunts and tricks that I guess just weren't suited for this company and were deemed unsafe. You don't want actors feeling unsafe when they show up to work 8 times a week for 8 shows. It's already hard enough dancing potentially on a raked stage or flying or going upside down, or even Wicked is tough. But Wicked, based on a big IP like The Wizard of Oz, it makes sense as a musical. Spider-Man, it's based on a big IP. It's got to make sense. It didn't quite make sense when the creative team didn't have the experience of working on other musicals. Why are there so many injuries happening? Why? Why? It's tough. You don't want to get hurt. You don't want to get hurt doing your show. And I've been hurt doing a show. Look, it's live theater. Things are going to happen, but you want to feel safe, especially when you're going out in front of like 1,800 people. Come on, it's 1,800 people. Julie Taymor barely had any other credits other than Lion King, and we haven't seen much from her since, although Danya Taymor has directed The Outsiders, the musical. On the bright side, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark did have several wins. Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark ultimately opened in November 2010, and closed in January 2014. The show had 182 performances and 1,066 performances. Actually, not so bad for a show, especially post-COVID standards. In 2012, Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark actually achieved the box office record at the Foxwoods Theater. And Spider-Man achieved the record for highest grossing Broadway show in any one week at that time. This was $2.9 million. That's actually a lot for the holiday week of 2012. That was later surpassed, I think, the next week by Wicked. At the end of 2024, Wicked dominated the box office record for any one single Broadway week with over $5 million in sales, just to get you an idea of where we've come with inflation and when you get a really popular movie in there. Julie Taymor is the perfect example of someone who has directed the most successful Broadway musical of all time and the least successful Broadway musical of all time. I guess it's also worth noting that when Spider-Man reached that box office record of $2.9 million, it was a 9-show week. So imagine how those actors felt showing up to a 9-show week feeling unsafe. Whew! 8 shows are the typical standard for 1 week of shows. It wasn't completely over, though, for Marvel doing musicals. As you may or may not know, Rogers the Musical actually opened at Disney's California Adventure after being teased in Hawkeye in 2021. This version opened at the Hyperion Theater at Disney's California Adventure, where Frozen once was. It only ran for 2 months, I believe, from June 2023 through August of 2023, and this whole show was a musical that never happened, that was designed as if the people of the Marvel Cinematic Universe were writing a show about Captain America, essentially a love letter to Captain America. Now, this musical had a score composed by Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman, who have written a lot of Broadway musicals. Hairspray, the music to Smash, the music to Mary Poppins Returns. They typically write in that vernacular of the 1960s era, so this actually makes a lot of sense for them writing the music to the Captain America musical, which takes place several decades ago. It's crazy to say that the Rogers musical at Disney's California Adventure made more sense than Spider-Man, the Broadway musical. And yet, it probably did. It's a shame that Marvel probably won't look at another Broadway musical, because if done right with the correct team, perhaps it could be something more. What if Andrew Lloyd Webber had done it? But what do you think? Did you see Spider-Man Turn Off the Dark when it was on Broadway? Do you regret not having seen it like me? A chance to have witnessed Broadway's biggest flop in history? I wish I didn't scoff at it back then. $75 million down the drain. Or would you rather just see me talk about the history of the Broadway conductor? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe at Jared B. Goldsmith and at Curtain Calls with Jared. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next time. Probably not in a Spidey suit, but maybe.
Curtain calls.